Germany produced 1,347 Tigers, but the United States answered with 49,234 Shermans. November 1944, Metz, France. The low growl of a Tiger I tank echoes through morning fog as Lieutenant Otto Carius peers through his periscope at the approaching storm of American steel. His Tiger's 88mm cannon can destroy any Allied tank at 2,000 meters. Its 100mm frontal armor deflects most enemy shells. This 57-ton monster represents the pinnacle of German engineering, each requiring over 300,000 man-hours to build. But across the Atlantic, Detroit's factories thunder day and night. Sparks fly from welding torches as Margaret Bourke-White captures history through her camera lens. American workers rivet Sherman hulls in 25,000 man-hours each. The numbers tell an impossible story. While Germany struggled to produce one Tiger, America rolled 36 Shermans off assembly lines. How did American abundance overwhelm German engineering? The answer would reshape modern warfare forever. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Fog clings to the fields outside Metz, France. November 1944. The diesel roar of a Tiger I tank reverberates against stone ruins, its 57 tons of steel and fury cutting through morning silence. Lieutenant Otto Carius adjusts his periscope, watching shadows move between hedgerows. The acrid smell of exhaust mixes with sweat and fear inside the cramped fighting compartment. His Tiger feels unstoppable. The 88mm cannon can destroy any Allied tank at 2,000 meters. 100mm frontal armor deflects most enemy shells. This mechanical leviathan represents German engineering at its finest. Precision steel, optical rangefinders, and devastating firepower rolled into one terrifying package, yet whispers circulate among the crew. Fuel shortages plague every operation. Worn-out parts are stripped from destroyed vehicles. The assembly line that birthed this monster cannot meet battlefield demand. By war's end, only 1,347 Tigers would roll from German factories, each requiring over 300,000 man-hours of meticulous craftsmanship. Otto checks his ammunition. Each 88mm shell weighs more than most men can lift. The Tiger's Maybach engine growls again, diesel smoke curling around the turret. Through his periscope, movement catches his eye, distant shapes emerging from morning mist. American armor approaches, engines coughing, tracks grinding against frost-hardened earth. The Tiger's cannon fires once, its thunder echoing across the valley. Smoke drifts into fog as the sound fades to silence. Otto knows this beast may be lost soon, not to enemy firepower alone, but to the inexorable tide of American abundance rolling across Europe. Detroit Arsenal. Michigan, 1942. Sparks cascade from welding torches like metallic rainfall. Conveyor belts rattle and clank as riveters hammer Sherman hulls into shape. The cavernous factory floor stretches beyond sight, filled with the symphony of American industry, grinding, hammering, welding, building. Margaret Bourke-White crouches behind her camera, lens focused on history in the making. Her photographs will capture the relentless rhythm of democracy at war, hands covered in grease, sweat on determined foreheads, steel taking shape beneath skilled fingers. Rows of women in coveralls fasten armor plates while men wheel turrets across oil-stained concrete. The smell of hot metal, cutting oil, and fresh paint permeates everything. Each Sherman requires roughly 25,000 man-hours to complete, a fraction of German tank production time. By late 1942, Detroit Arsenal alone produces more tanks than Germany manages in 12 months. Quality meets quantity, as American engineers balance survivability with mass production. Train whistles scream outside as locomotives queue with flat car loads. 20-30 Shermans per train, heading toward Atlantic ports and waiting Liberty ships. Each tank carries a 75mm main gun with 90 rounds of ammunition. Top speed reaches 38 kilometers per hour on roads, 24 cross-country. Crews of 5 men each: driver, assistant driver, gunner, loader, commander. Assembly line supervisor checks his clipboard. Production targets met, exceeded. Behind every rivet lies American industrial might awakening to its full potential. Margaret adjusts her camera angle, capturing workers whose dedication will soon face German steel in distant battlefields. A completed Sherman rolls off the line, olive drab paint gleaming under factory lights. Its engine rumbles to life as the test driver engages gears. Outside, Atlantic winds carry the scent of war across an ocean where hedgerows wait in silence. Tunisia, North Africa, 1943. Sand whips across the desert battlefield, choking engines and blinding men. Shermans advance through waves of heat shimmer, their steel hulls baking under merciless sun. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams surveys burning wrecks scattered across barren ground, lessons written in twisted metal and spilled oil. The Battle of Kasserine Pass cost 183 American tanks, crews learning brutal truths about German armor superiority. Tiger tanks appeared like desert mirages, firing devastating salvos before vanishing into rocky terrain. Each encounter taught deadly lessons about range, penetration, and tactical positioning, but American logistics never stopped. While German Tigers sat immobilized for lack of spare parts, replacement Shermans arrived weekly at Algiers port. Crews analyzed every engagement, noting enemy fuel limitations and mechanical breakdowns. Speed and coordination became American weapons against German individual superiority. Abrams studies battle damage reports, understanding patterns emerging from chaos. Tigers are rare, perhaps 20 operational across the entire North African theater. Shermans number in hundreds, with more arriving daily. Mathematical inevitability begins to favor American abundance over German excellence. Mechanics work around the clock, repairing damaged vehicles, modifying armor placement based on combat experience. Gun sights are adjusted, radio procedures refined, crew training intensified. Every loss generates knowledge that saves future lives. Desert winds carry the sound of distant artillery. Smoke columns mark German positions, but Allied supply lines stretch unbroken to American factories. Behind every damaged Sherman lies the promise of replacement. Behind every lost crew, the certainty that more trained tankers are crossing the Atlantic. Dust settles on the battlefield as evening approaches. Abrams looks toward Algiers, where ships unload tomorrow's armor. The tide of American steel has only begun to flow. Berlin, 1943. Albert Speer sits beneath flickering lamplight, eyes scanning production charts that tell stories of industrial strain. Allied bombing raids have severed rail networks, disrupting steel shipments to tank factories. Molybdenum shortages slow armor plate production. Skilled machinists are drafted to desperate front lines, leaving apprentices to handle precision work. Hitler demands more Tigers and Panthers, convinced that superior German engineering will overcome Allied numbers. But Speer understands mathematics better than ideology. His charts reveal uncomfortable truths about production capacity versus battlefield requirements. Each Panther tank requires 150,000 man-hours to complete. Tigers exceed 300,000, time spent on optical rangefinders, transmission systems, and armor plating that must meet exacting specifications. German craftsmen take pride in their work, but pride cannot accelerate assembly lines when raw materials run short. Speer requests conferences about simplified designs, mass production techniques learned from American industry. Political pressure overrules practical concerns. German tanks must inspire fear and boost morale, not merely win battles through numerical superiority. Factory reports pile on his desk. Krupp Steel Works operating at 60% capacity after Allied bombing. Optics manufacturers struggling with skilled labor shortages. Railway transportation disrupted across the Ruhr Valley. Each percentage point of lost production translates to fewer tanks reaching the eastern and western fronts. Meanwhile, intelligence reports describe American industrial output that seems impossible. Detroit producing more tanks in 1 month than Germany manages in 6. Liberty ships carrying supplies across submarine-infested Atlantic waters. Allied logistics networks that stretch from Pittsburgh steel mills to frontline repair facilities. Speer leans back in his chair, pencil poised above another calculation. Each number reveals the widening gap between German engineering perfection and American industrial reality. The mathematics of modern warfare are becoming clear. June 6, 1944. The English Channel churns gray-green as landing craft plow through 5-foot swells. Engines roar above wind and waves as Shermans emerge from the transport ships. Flotation screens hissing as they wade through surf toward Omaha Beach. Salt spray mixes with diesel exhaust and the acrid smell of naval gunfire. Lieutenant Colonel Crichton, Abrams maneuvers his combat command through hedgerow country. Tank treads tearing deep furrows in Norman soil. His Sherman's engine throbs steadily, radio crackling with reports from units spread across the expanding beachhead. Intelligence indicates German armor concentrations inland, waiting to counterattack. Tigers strike from concealed positions among ancient stone walls. Their 88-millimeter guns destroy 2 Shermans instantly, armor-piercing shells punching through frontal plating like paper. Crews bail out, some running, others motionless in burning hulks. The German advantage in individual combat remains devastating, but Abrams calls forward reinforcements. Wave after wave of American armor rolls inland, Shermans modified with bulldozer blades to clear obstacles, others carrying bridging equipment or extra ammunition. Coordination and speed neutralize Tiger advantages. 5 Shermans can surround 1 Tiger, attacking from multiple angles while radioing accurate positions to artillery observers. Over 15,000 Allied armored vehicles land in Normandy within the first weeks. Germany fields fewer than 500 operational tanks across the entire Western Front. Each destroyed Sherman is replaced within days. Each lost Tiger represents irreplaceable manufacturing capacity. Radio reports flow constantly. German resistance stiffening near Caen. American armor bypassing strong points, exploiting breakthrough opportunities. The Bocage country favors defenders, but American numbers create tactical flexibility impossible for German forces to match. Smoke rises from destroyed German positions as fresh Sherman columns advance through gaps in enemy lines. The steel avalanche has begun. Cologne, Germany, 1945. Rubble chokes medieval streets where children once played. Civilians peer from basement windows as Sherman tanks rumble past in endless columns, their olive-drab hulls contrasting sharply with gray stone ruins. The smell of burned buildings mixes with diesel exhaust and the wet concrete dust of a city dying. Families scavenge for food among collapsed buildings. Ration cards now provide fewer than 1,500 calories per day, barely enough to sustain life. Coal shortages leave apartments freezing. Water systems function sporadically after Allied bombing campaigns targeted infrastructure supporting German war production. A young girl counts the American tanks rolling through her neighborhood streets. 20, 30, 40. She loses track after 50, overwhelmed by the mechanical river flowing past her window. Each Sherman represents industrial capacity her homeland cannot match, abundance that defies her understanding of wartime scarcity. Behind the tanks come supply trucks loaded with food, medical supplies, blankets. American logistics networks stretch from Detroit factories to frontline distribution points, sustained by Liberty ships crossing the Atlantic, despite submarine threats. The Red Ball Express delivers 12,000 tons of supplies daily across liberated France. German civilians witness the stark contrast between Allied abundance and their own desperate shortage. American soldiers distribute chocolate and canned goods to hungry children. Every gesture demonstrates the vast productive capacity that has overwhelmed German resistance. Factory sirens no longer sound shift changes. Industrial machinery sits silent, bombed or dismantled. The Krupp steelworks that once forged Tiger armor now produces nothing but smoke and rubble. German engineering excellence has been strangled by lack of raw materials and transportation networks. The mechanical procession continues through narrow streets. Tracks grinding against cobblestones, worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic. History moves forward on American steel. Ardennes Forest, December 1944. Snow blankets the battlefield like a funeral shroud. Engines grind through frozen mud as German armor spearheads the last desperate offensive. Tigers lead the charge, their massive hulls breaking through American defensive lines with devastating efficiency. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams commands Combat Command B near Bastogne, his radio crackling with reports of German breakthrough attempts. Artillery thunders constantly, muzzle flashes lighting the winter darkness. Machine guns chatter from concealed positions as infantry supports armored advances. German Tigers exploit their superior firepower, destroying American positions with methodical precision. Each 88mm shell carries enough explosive force to disable any Allied tank at maximum range. Snow camouflages German positions, making targeting difficult for American gunners, but numerical superiority begins to tell. Shermans swarm around isolated Tigers like wolves attacking elk, using speed and coordination to overcome individual German advantages. Radio networks coordinate flanking movements, artillery strikes, and infantry support. What Germans cannot replace, Americans produce in overwhelming quantities. Germany commits 500 tanks to the offensive. Within 3 weeks, over half are destroyed or abandoned for lack of fuel. American replacements arrive daily via Red Ball Express supply lines. Each Sherman lost in combat is replaced within 48 hours by fresh vehicles arriving from Antwerp port facilities. Abrams studies his tactical maps by flashlight. German spearheads are losing momentum, running out of fuel and ammunition. American defensive lines bend but do not break, sustained by industrial capacity that German planners never fully comprehended. Snow continues falling as German forces begin their final retreat. Sherman tracks carve fresh lines through white powder, marking the advance of American armor toward the German heartland. The Battle of the Bulge becomes Germany's last offensive gasp. United States ports, 1944-1945. Freight trains snake through industrial landscapes, their whistles echoing across steel mills and tank factories. Liberty ships queue at Brooklyn, Baltimore, and Norfolk harbors, waiting to load combat vehicles bound for European battlefields. The rhythm of American production never stops. Margaret Bourke-White documents the massive logistical network supporting Allied operations. Her photographs capture workers stacking tank hulls like cordwood, locomotives pulling flat cars loaded with fresh Shermans, ships' holds packed with spare parts and ammunition. Every image tells the story of democratic abundance overcoming totalitarian scarcity. Detroit Arsenal operates 24 hours daily. Pittsburgh steel mills pour molten metal into ingot molds. Assembly lines stretch beyond sight, workers riveting armor plates with mechanical precision. Quality control inspectors test every weld, every gun sight, every radio system. American manufacturing has achieved unprecedented scale and efficiency. The numbers stagger imagination. 49,234 Sherman tanks produced between 1942 and 1945. 2.4 million trucks. 6,000 Liberty ships built in 4 years. Spare parts manufactured by the millions, track shoes, road wheels, engine components, ammunition of every caliber. Supply networks coordinate production from raw materials to frontline delivery. Iron ore from Minnesota travels to Pittsburgh steel mills, becomes armor plate, is shaped into tank hulls, transported to final assembly, loaded onto trains, shipped across the Atlantic, and delivered to combat units within weeks of leaving the foundry. Radio reports from European battlefields influence production decisions. More high-explosive shells needed for infantry support. Improved armor-piercing ammunition required for German heavy tanks. Better radio equipment requested by field commanders. American industry responds with flexibility that German planners cannot match. Steam whistles announce another shift change as workers file through factory gates. Behind them, the arsenal of democracy continues producing victory. Germany, early 1945. Railway yards lie in ruins, twisted steel rails pointing skyward like broken fingers. Factory buildings collapse under their own weight, machinery scattered across bomb-cratered floors. The industrial heart of the Third Reich beats erratically, starved of raw materials and skilled workers. Tigers sit abandoned beside roads, victims of fuel shortages rather than enemy action. Crews strip usable parts from immobilized vehicles, cannibalizing one tank to keep another operational. Spare parts that once flowed from Henschel and Krupp factories now exist only in scavenged form. Pulled from battlefield wrecks, Albert Speer tours the devastation, his notebooks recording the collapse of German productive capacity. Less than 300 operational German tanks remain across all fronts by April 1945. Allied forces field thousands, with replacement vehicles arriving faster than combat can destroy them. Mechanics work desperately to maintain remaining German armor. Transmissions fail without proper lubricants. Engines seize when inferior fuel clogs injection systems. Optical rangefinders crack in sub-zero temperatures. Every technical advantage that made German tanks superior becomes meaningless without industrial support. German tank commanders radio desperately for reinforcements that no longer exist. Fuel supplies dwindle to emergency reserves. Ammunition becomes precious, each shell carefully rationed. Crews abandon perfectly functional vehicles when supply lines collapse entirely. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A tiger I burns beside the Autobahn. Its thick armor glowing orange in the darkness. Smoke rises from its turret as ammunition explodes internally. No replacement will arrive from German factories. No spare parts will restore its mechanical systems. This monument to engineering excellence dies not from enemy action, but from industrial strangulation. The mathematics of modern warfare have rendered German craftsmanship obsolete. Mass production defeats individual superiority when numbers reach critical ratios. Berlin, May 1945. Sherman columns roll through streets lined with rubble and silence. Spring winds snap Allied flags from radio antennas as American armor occupies the German capital. The war in Europe ends, not with dramatic final battles, but with industrial exhaustion. Germany simply cannot continue fighting. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams surveys the devastated cityscape from his command, Sherman. Months of urban combat have reduced grand boulevards to obstacle courses of broken concrete and twisted steel. His unit has traveled from Normandy beaches to the heart of the Third Reich, sustained by American productive capacity that German leaders never fully understood. Victory statistics tell the complete story. 49,234 Sherman tanks versus 1,247 German Tigers, a production ratio of 36-1. When quality meets quantity on this scale, mathematics become destiny. German engineering excellence could not overcome American industrial abundance. Radio reports flow from units across occupied Germany. Resistance pockets surrender when isolated from supply networks. German civilians emerge from basements, stunned by the scale of Allied logistics operations. Food distribution, medical care, and reconstruction efforts demonstrate productive capacity that extends far beyond military applications. Abrams reflects on the massive human effort behind every tank, every shell, every gallon of fuel that brought his unit to Berlin. Factory workers in Detroit, steel mill operators in Pittsburgh, merchant mariners crossing submarine-infested waters, logistics personnel coordinating supply networks across continents. Victory belonged to democratic societies that could mobilize entire populations for sustained industrial effort. German surrender documents are signed in suburban rams, but the war was decided in American factories long before armies met in Europe. Numbers don't lie. They determine history's verdict with mathematical precision. Nuremberg, Germany, 1946. War crimes tribunals examine evidence of industrial planning that supported Nazi aggression. Among the documents, Albert Speer's production records tell a story of resources squandered on engineering perfection, while American factories achieved unprecedented scale through simplified designs and coordinated. Manufacturing prosecutors present charts comparing German and Allied production capacity. United States gross domestic product in 1945 exceeded the combined output of Germany, Japan, and Italy. Democratic societies proved capable of mobilizing resources more efficiently than totalitarian regimes. Despite theoretical advantages of centralized planning, Speer testifies about production bottlenecks that crippled German war efforts. Skilled labor shortages, raw material scarcity, transportation disruption, and bombing damage combined to strangle industrial output. Each Tiger tank represented resources that could have produced multiple simpler vehicles more suitable to actual battlefield. Requirements. Military historians analyzed tactical lessons learned during 4 years of armored combat. German technical superiority in individual weapon systems could not overcome Allied advantages in logistics, coordination, and replacement capacity. Modern warfare rewards sustained production over engineering excellence when numerical ratios reach critical thresholds. Intelligence officers examined captured German documents revealing desperate attempts to match American output through slave labor and resource concentration. Efficiency gained through brutality could not compensate for fundamental disadvantages in industrial base, transportation networks, and raw material access. The evidence accumulates into historical verdict. German defeat resulted not from inferior soldiers or flawed strategy, but from industrial mathematics that made sustained resistance impossible. American abundance overcame German excellence through sheer scale of productive capacity. Justice tribunals render verdicts based on legal evidence. But history's judgment relies on production statistics. The war was decided in Detroit factories as much as European battlefields. Korean War. 1950s, American armor advances through Asian terrain, bearing new designations but maintaining doctrinal principles learned in European combat. The M46 Patton tank and later the M60 incorporate lessons from Sherman operations against German heavy armor. In 1980, the United States Army introduces the M1 Abrams main battle tank, named for Lieutenant Colonel Craigston Abrams, who commanded armored units from North Africa to Germany. His tactical innovations in coordinating multiple Shermans against individual German tanks became doctrine taught at armor schools worldwide. Margaret Bourke-White's wartime photographs achieve iconic status, documenting American industrial mobilization that transformed democratic society into history's most effective war machine. Her images of factory workers and assembly lines remind future generations how civilian dedication created military victory. Sherman tanks serve in 50 nations' armies during the Cold War, exported through military assistance programs that spread American tactical doctrine globally. Simplified maintenance, reliable mechanical systems, and battlefield survivability make the Sherman platform ideal for international service long after World War II ends. NATO standardization adopts American armor doctrine, emphasizing coordination, logistics, and numerical superiority over individual vehicle performance. Alliance training exercises demonstrate how democratic nations can achieve tactical effectiveness through industrial cooperation and resource sharing. Veterans organizations preserve Sherman tanks in museums worldwide, monuments to American productive capacity during history's greatest industrial mobilization. Restored vehicles demonstrate the engineering balance between battlefield effectiveness and mass production requirements that defined Allied victory, from North African deserts to Korean hills to cold. War confrontation lines, American armor doctrine proves enduring. Victory flows not from superior individual weapons, but from sustained industrial capacity supporting coordinated military operations. The legacy of 49,000 Shermans shapes modern warfare's fundamental principles. The war ended not with a single battle, but with exhaustion. Europe in 1945 was a continent broken by years of conflict, a land where cities lay in ruins, economies collapsed, and survivors struggled to comprehend the scale of devastation. Yet beyond the rubble, the war had revealed something profound, the triumph of industrial mathematics over technical perfection. The German Tiger tank symbolized mechanical mastery, but it was a machine at odds with the very nature of modern total war. It embodied the belief that victory could be secured by building the finest weapon, a steel titan unmatched in direct combat. For a time, it seemed to validate that faith. Allied soldiers who first encountered Tigers often spoke of them in hushed tones as if they were facing invincible beasts. Crews whispered that their shells bounced harmlessly off its armor, that its 88mm gun could kill them before they even entered firing range. The Tiger was both a weapon and a psychological weapon, a machine designed to inspire fear as much as destruction. Yet history does not reward isolated brilliance when confronted by overwhelming scale. The Sherman tank, derided by some of its crews as a Ronson for its tendency to ignite when hit, never matched the Tiger in a duel. It was smaller, less armored, and carried a gun that struggled to penetrate the thick frontal plates of its German rival. But the Sherman was never designed to fight alone. It was built to fight in swarms backed by artillery, infantry, air power, and above all, by a logistical machine that could replace losses faster than Germany could create them. This contrast tells us something essential about the 20th century. The Second World War was not won by the best machine, but by the best system, and the system that carried the Allies to victory was industrial abundance. When Franklin Roosevelt spoke of the United States as the arsenal of democracy in December 1940, the phrase was aspirational. At that time, American industry was not yet geared for war. Factories produced automobiles, refrigerators, and consumer goods. Detroit hummed with the rhythms of civilian prosperity, not military necessity. But within 2 years, the transformation was complete. Assembly lines that once rolled out sedans now produced tanks and bombers. Civilian workers, many of them women entering heavy industry for the first time, became the shock troops of a new kind of warfare. One fought as much with rivets and welding torches as with rifles and artillery. The statistics remain staggering even decades later. Nearly 50,000 Shermans produced, over 300,000 aircraft, millions of trucks, rifles, and artillery shells. The numbers dwarf anything Germany or Japan could achieve. American industry mobilized with a flexibility that authoritarian regimes, with their rigid command structures and reliance on scarce slave labor, could not replicate. Every Sherman that rolled onto a battlefield in North Africa, Normandy, or the Ardennes represented not just a tank, but an entire chain of production stretching from iron mines in Minnesota to steel mills in Pittsburgh, from factories in Detroit to shipping yards in New Jersey. The system was a living organism, fed by resources, powered by human labor, and directed by logistical genius. Margaret Bourke-White's photographs immortalized this transformation. She captured the sweat-streaked faces of riveters, the sparks flying from assembly lines, the endless rows of half-finished tank hulls stretching into the distance. Her images told the story of how democracy, when fully mobilized, could outproduce any dictatorship. The Germans could build a Tiger that dominated the battlefield, but only a handful of them. The Americans could build a Sherman that was good enough, and tens of thousands of them. In the arithmetic of war, quantity became quality. German engineers were not blind to these realities. Men like Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments and War Production, understood that industrial warfare required simplicity and scale. He proposed rationalizing designs, creating standardized models, and focusing on production speed rather than technical perfection. Yet ideology overrode practicality. Hitler himself demanded weapons that inspired awe. The Tiger, the Panther, the V-2 rocket, even when those weapons absorbed resources disproportionate to their battlefield effect. Each Tiger required over 300,000 man-hours to build. Every detail, from the complex transmission system to the precision optics, demanded skilled labor and scarce resources. Allied bombing campaigns further disrupted production, destroying factories, rail networks, and supply depots. By 1944, Germany was fighting not just on battlefields, but against a collapsing industrial base. And yet, the myth of German technical superiority persisted. Even decades later, the Tiger and Panther tanks remain icons of armored warfare, celebrated in documentaries, video games, and war museums. They symbolize power, engineering elegance, and battlefield dominance. But in truth, they were monuments to a flawed strategy. The more Germany invested in perfection, the less it could sustain the war effort. It is tempting to speak of production numbers as if they were abstract. But behind every Sherman stood a crew of 5 men who lived, fought, and often died inside its steel shell. The abundance that defined American warfare carried a human cost measured in blood and fire. In Normandy's bocage, Shermans advanced into ambushes, their thin armor pierced by German guns. At Kasserine Pass, they burned in the desert sun. In the Ardennes, they froze in snowdrifts, fighting tigers in the forests of Belgium. For the men inside, the knowledge that another Sherman would replace theirs offered little comfort. The nickname Death Trap was not a myth. Many crews perished when their tanks ignited. Yet the abundance gave them hope as well. They knew reinforcements were always coming. They knew fuel, ammunition, and spare parts flowed steadily from ports to front lines. Unlike German crews who often fought with failing transmissions and dwindling supplies, American tankers could trust that their machines would be maintained, replaced, and supported by an army of mechanics and logisticians. This was the paradox of the Sherman. It was at once vulnerable and reassuring. It represented both danger and salvation. In the years after the war, the story of the Tiger versus the Sherman became mythologized. Veterans remembered the terror of facing German heavy armor, the helplessness of watching shells bounce off enemy tanks. Writers and filmmakers amplified the drama, creating a David and Goliath narrative in which Allied tankers survived through courage and ingenuity against impossible odds. But the fuller truth is more complex. The Shermans did not win by being braver or more skilled than their opponents, though many crews displayed extraordinary courage. They won because they were part of a system, a vast industrial, logistical, and strategic system that overwhelmed German excellence. The true Goliath was not the Tiger, but the American economy. Today, preserved Shermans sit in museums and memorial parks across the world. Children climb their hulls, veterans run their hands along the cold steel, historians debate their design. They are no longer engines of war, but monuments to a lesson in modern conflict, the side that mobilizes society most effectively, that aligns its factories, workers, and resources with military necessity, will ultimately prevail. The Tigers, by contrast, are rare relics. Only a handful survive, often displayed as marvels of engineering. Visitors marvel at their size, their armor, their gun, yet they also represent failure, the failure of a nation to understand that perfection means little when the enemy can build 50 machines for every one you produce. The legacy of the Sherman versus the Tiger extends far beyond World War II. It shaped the way militaries thought about armored warfare in the Cold War and beyond. The United States, in particular, embraced the doctrine that numbers, logistics, and coordination matter more than individual technical superiority. The Patton series of tanks carried this philosophy into Korea and Vietnam. The M1 Abrams, named for Creighton Abrams himself, embodied the balance between firepower, protection, and logistical sustainability. Unlike the Tiger, it was designed from the start to be mass-produced, maintained, and integrated into a system of combined arms. The lesson applies not only to tanks, but to all modern weapons. Aircraft carriers, jet fighters, missiles, and drones, all are only as effective as the system that sustains them. A perfect machine is useless if it cannot be replaced, repaired, or supplied. The Tiger taught that lesson in failure. The Sherman taught it in victory. Perhaps the most profound realization of the war is this: battles are often decided long before armies meet. They are decided in factories and shipyards, in rail networks and oil refineries. They are decided by who can mobilize their society most completely and most efficiently. Germany in 1945 had brilliant engineers but no fuel. It had tanks but no spare parts. It had soldiers but no supplies. The United States had all of these in abundance. That imbalance made the outcome inevitable. When historians look back at World War II, they often describe Stalingrad, Normandy, or the Ardennes as turning points. But another turning point occurred in the quiet hum of American assembly lines, in the rhythmic pounding of rivet guns, in the steady flow of trains carrying Shermans eastward. Victory was forged not just on the battlefield, but in the unglamorous labor of workers who never saw combat, yet shaped its outcome more decisively than any single soldier. The war's end did not end its lessons. Survivors carried memories into civilian life. Tank crews who fought in Shermans told their children and grandchildren of cramped compartments, of engines roaring in the night, of comrades lost in fire and steel. Factory workers who built those tanks spoke of pride and fatigue, of 18-hour shifts, of the knowledge that their labor directly shaped the fate of men overseas. Margaret Bourke-White's photographs became part of collective memory. They captured not just machines but people, the human faces behind production. They remind us that the arsenal of democracy was not an abstract force, but a million individual acts of labor, determination, and sacrifice. The Tiger and the Sherman are more than tanks. They are symbols of two visions of warfare, one rooted in perfection, the other in abundance. One sought victory through fear and dominance, the other through scale and resilience. History's verdict was clear. Germany produced 1,347 Tigers. The United States produced 49,134 Shermans. The ratio, 36-1, is not just a statistic. It is a lesson about how wars are fought and won. The Tiger will always capture imagination. It will always appear in films, books, and games as the terrifying beast of armored warfare. But the Sherman, humble, flawed, and unglamorous, is the true symbol of victory. It represents the idea that when a society mobilizes fully, when it values practicality over perfection, when it understands that war is as much about logistics as about courage, it can overcome any opponent. In the end, the war was not decided in the fog of Metz or the snows of Ardennes, but in the thunder of Detroit's factories, in the sparks of welding torches, in the clatter of assembly lines. The Sherman tank was not the best tank of the war, but it was the right tank, the tank that history required, the tank that embodied the truth that numbers, not myths, decide the fate of nations. And that is why, in the rubble of Berlin and the silence of Nuremberg, in the memory of veterans and the pages of history, the story of 49,134 Shermans and 1,347 Tigers remains not just a comparison of machines, but a parable about modern war itself. If you enjoyed the story, I hand-picked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.